Welcome to the Raised with Jesus podcast, 10 minutes every day where the life of Jesus meets yours. We've got day 7 of our Bible 100 reading challenge, and today we're looking at Genesis chapter 15. If you're on Facebook, make sure to check out Raised with Jesus, as well as the Bread for Beggars blog. Bread for Beggars on Facebook. You can check the show notes for the links today. Anyway, Genesis chapter 15. Back in Genesis chapter 12, we had God's initial call to Abraham. Abraham was 75 years old. And then chapters 13, he moved to Canaan with his nephew Lot. And we assume that he moves there, and Lot is either a co-worker or perhaps Abraham kind of has custody of him. Maybe we don't know exactly how old he is at the time. But then back in chapter 13, they separated because, Lot wanted the good grazing land and their flocks were too numerous to be grazing together. Chapter 14, Sodom was attacked, and then Abram had to go chase down the people who had carried off his nephew Lot, and he called out those 318 trained men who had been born in his household. So he's a fairly wealthy man. He has his own miniature army. But the notable part about chapter 14 was that they had encountered Melchizedek, king of Salem. I'm just going to read a couple verses there from chapter 14, starting in verse 18. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He is a priest of God Most High. He blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And the writer to the Hebrews makes a big point out of this, that this man Melchizedek, we don't know where he comes from, we don't know what happens to him, we don't know how old he is. All we know is that he's a priest of God Most High. And his name Melchizedek, meaning king of righteousness. And then he's also called the king of Salem, or king of Shalom, modern day Jerusalem. And he's the king of peace. And the writer to the Hebrews makes a big point out of these 3 verses of history to say, you know what? Jesus is a member of this greater priesthood of Melchizedek. Jesus, born from the tribe of Judah, not from the tribe of Levi, and so Jesus doesn't serve at the temple because only Levites served at the temple. But Jesus here, Jesus is from this Melchizedek priesthood, is what he kind of calls him, because God picks up on this in the book of Psalms, I think Psalm 110. And Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. And the writer to the Hebrews makes the point that Abram pays an offering to Melchizedek. And in that sense, Levi paid an offering to Melchizedek as well, demonstrating that the Melchizedek priesthood was greater than the Levitical priesthood. That's getting a little bit further afield, but that's kind of all in the background. And to chapter 15. So Abram has been living in Canaan for a while. He's probably 80, 82. We know that he's not yet 85, because he's 85 when he takes, or 84, 85, when he takes Hagar as a second wife, and then he has Ishmael with her. And this chapter 15 happens before the circumstances with Hagar. So picking it up in Genesis chapter 15, verse 1. After these events, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. He said, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram said, "Lord God, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" Abram also said, "Look, you have given me no offspring, so a servant born in my house will be my heir." Just then the word of the Lord came to him. God said, "This man will not be your heir, but instead the one who will come out of your own body will be your heir." The Lord then brought him outside and said, "Now look toward the sky and count the stars, if you are able to count them." He said to Abram, "This is what your descendants will be like." Abram believed in the Lord, and the Lord credited it to him as righteousness. He said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession." He said, "Lord God, how will I know that I will possess it?" The Lord said to him, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Abram gathered all of these, divided them in half, and laid the 2 halves across from each other, but he did not divide the birds in 2. Birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. When the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Then terrifying, deep darkness fell on him. The Lord said to Abram, "Know this, your descendants will live as aliens in a land that is not theirs, and they will serve its people who will afflict them for 400 years. But I will surely judge the nation that they will serve. Afterward, your descendants will come out with great wealth, but you will go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. In a fourth generation your descendants will come here again, because the guilt of the Amorites is not yet full." Then when the sun had gone down and it was dark, suddenly a smoking oven and a flaming torch passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram. He said, "To your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. I will give you the territory of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." This is the word of our God. So as I noticed, as we noted previously, a little bit of context here. Abram is, probably in his early 80s. He's been living in the land of Canaan for a few years. He's had to rescue his nephew Lot. He doesn't have any children yet. And God says to him here at the beginning of this chapter, he says, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Perhaps in response to the previous chapter, where there had been that war, or that war among these city-states of Canaan, where these kings had carried off his nephew Lot, and you could see where Abram is living in this land. God had promised to give it to him, and Abram might be like, "Wait a second, what if they all mass their forces and attack me?" And so God reassures him, "You have nothing to be afraid of." But Abram replies, "But what can you give me?" He's like, "I've got all the wealth that I need. I've got far more than I need, but I don't have any children. And the one who would be my inheritor is this servant who was born in my household." And God renews his covenant. That's what this chapter is about. God renews his covenant. And this covenant that God makes with Abram, you notice it's a one-sided thing. That word covenant is very much like our English concept, our American concept of a contract. Like when you sit down and you sign for a car loan, or you sign on the mortgage, all the parties that are involved put their signature on the dotted line, and then the contract lays out the terms of that contract agreement, or a covenant agreement. And that's what we have here. When God says, "Well, let me renew my covenant with you. Let me remind you and reassure you of this." And so Abram collects all these animals, and he does all the things that they would do in that Middle Eastern culture to ratify a covenant. And what he does is he collects these animals, he cuts them in half, except for the birds, and then the terms of the covenant would be laid out, and then two parties who are making the contract agreement together, they would walk down the middle of these two halves of animals together. And from what I've read, there's basically two understandings, and I can't say which one is more true. They both might be true. Either the lesser form that I've heard is that if after they walk through the middle of these animals that have been cut in half, the lesser covenant is, "Well, if I don't keep my side of the covenant, you can do this to all my animals." And the greater of the covenants would be, "If I don't keep my side of the covenant, then cut me in half the way that these animals are cut in half." But you notice what God does here, that Abram doesn't pass through the middle, but God passes through. Symbolized with that flaming oven, like a clay furnace, or kind of like the brick house pizza, kind of an oven passing down through the middle, and then a fire torch passing down through the middle. God himself commits himself to the covenant with nothing coming from Abram. And that's the grace that Paul picks up on when he refers to this account in the book of Romans, that Abram believed God and he credited it to him as righteousness. And so God renews his promise, and God reassures Abram that his promise will come true. And how beautiful is that for us as well? Because Abram, this takes place at a specific time, a specific place with a real person. It's right around the year 2085 BC. Abram is right around 82, 84 years old. He's a real person. And our Christian faith is grounded in real history. And God himself is born as a real descendant from these people. That the God who makes these promises to Abram is the God who kept the promises that he made to Abram and who has kept the promises that he has made to you and to me. He has committed himself to this one-sided covenant, this relationship between you and me, this contract where God himself, in the person and work of Jesus Christ, the eternal Son of God, where God himself has fulfilled all righteousness and has counted that as yours and mine. So as you go about your day, just keep in mind that God has done everything that is needed to make a relationship with you, and he has brought you into this covenant relationship together with him. One final note, if you are enjoying this, be sure to leave a comment at our Facebook page or contact me directly with any improvements. Check out the show notes for my cell phone number. You can just text me there. God bless your day.